Hey folks, Colin here from Sumthins Recording, and today we're going to talk about how to choose the best audio interface for your home studio in just 3 steps. Now, if you're new to the whole home studio mixing, recording type of area, then I have a free gift that's going to help you get better mixes right from the get-go. This is my 7-step mixing checklist. You can download it for free using the link in the description. It will guide you through the entire mixing process, step by step, to help you get professional and radio-ready mixes without any of the guesswork and without any of the hassle. So let's jump in here to talking about audio interfaces. Step 1 to consider when choosing an audio interface is you want to realize or think about how many inputs you're going to need in your different scenarios, right? Today's generation, today's times, really we're only looking at a maximum of probably 2 inputs for most studio situations, right? We're not looking at, giant mixing desks anymore, for most studios. Most home studios are working off of a 1 or 2 channel interface in most scenarios. The reason being is, a lot of times we're doing addictive drums or get good drums, or we're, using drum samples to build out different beats and stuff. And all we need is an input for our microphone, so an XLR input, and then we need some kind of TRS input or 1/4 inch input for our guitars if we're doing that type of thing. Really the only scenario you're going to need 2 separate inputs for is if you do any kind of stereo keys tracking or stuff. But other than that, we're really looking at just 1 or 2 maximum inputs. So if you get one with the hybrid inputs, right, you can get 2, so you can plug in 2 TRS cables or 2 mic cables at the same time if you use DI boxes for your keyboards. So a couple examples here we're going to go over. I have 4 examples we're going to use. We'll probably go through each example here for all 3 of the steps and talk about the different scenarios and the different options. So our first option here is the Focusrite Scarlett Solo. So when considering inputs, this is technically a 1 or 2 channel input interface. We have 1 XLR input here, and we have our 48 volts if we need that, and we have 1 1/4 inch input here. So that's technically 1 input a piece, or 2 inputs if you're plugging your mic and your guitar in at the same time. So this is a nice little interface, basic little interface to get you started if you're just jumping into the home studio area or the studio experience. It's a little bit pricier for this kind of interface at $119. The other option we're going to talk about here for smaller interfaces is the Audio Box USB. Now this is an older interface. I had this many years ago. This is what I started my studio with, was a 2-channel Audio Box USB like this. So this has 2 of those hybrid inputs that I was talking about. We have a gain control for each one. We have a mix control. We have a headphone knob here, and we have our main out. The biggest difference for me between the Audio Box USB and the Scarlett Solo is the Scarlett Solo can be a little bit less user-friendly, but we're going to talk about that down the road with the 3rd step here. Our next one we're going to talk about moving up. So if you do need more inputs for your tracking, let's say you need to be able to track live drums, or you need to be able to track a whole band at the same time, right? This is one of the bigger interfaces that I got to start off with. So this is actually a mixer and an audio interface. It comes with actually onboard effects too. This is the Soundcraft Signature 22 MTK, which is multi-track mixer. It doubles as an analog mixer as well, so if you need to take it out, do live sound or something with that, you can as well. So we have 22 inputs. We have a couple stereo here at the end, so if you do need to do stereo keys or keep them in all the time, there's a couple stereo TRS or 1/4 inch inputs here at the end. And we have plenty of XLR mic inputs to hook up a full drum kit and keep it plugged in if you need to track a live band. We have an EQ band here along with our input gain. We have a high pass filter, USB knobs, so you can set a channel here at the end for your output from your DAW, from your computer. And of course we have faders for all our channels, and we have a couple group faders here. Again, if you're doing, kind of live scenarios and you want to send faders to different groups here. We have a couple different outputs too. Again, that's something we'll talk about down the road. I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. And then our fourth option here that we're going to talk about, this is the PreSonus Studio Live 32S. So this is a 32 channel digital mixer and audio interface. This is what I currently work on. This is what I upgraded to a couple years back now. So we have 32 different inputs. So that, let's say you need to track a full band, right? And you have a huge drum kit. Maybe you got 4 toms, 2 overheads, right? 2 on the kick, 2 on the snare. You got 2 room mics. That's a lot of inputs for just your drums. And then you got to consider what? Stereo keys, 2 guitar players, and maybe you want to do DIs on both your guitars. You got a bass player, maybe you want to take a DI and an amp, and maybe you have a couple vocalists too. That's a lot of inputs that you need to be able to get in. And that is why I upgraded to this a while back, so I can keep all of that plugged in and have those extra inputs available to me as well if I want to put up, room mics in the room or talkback mics or that kind of thing as well. Step number 2 we are going to talk about is the DAW you're using. So we're going to jump back here to the Focusrite Scarlett Solo. Focusrite makes a lot of different interfaces, so if you need to expand, right, you can always look to Focusrite. I think they make 16-channel rack mount versions. They make the 2i2, which is kind of sitting near the audio box USB, although it's a little bit more expensive. But it is a 2-channel interface. It gives you that little bit more extra inputs. The reason we're going to talk about DAWs is some interfaces go better with some DAWs, right? They combine well, they interface well together. One of the reasons I reached for the PreSonus Studio Live is because I'm using PreSonus Studio One as my DAW. So a PreSonus interface like this is going to go a lot better with a PreSonus DAW than, say, if I reached for, the Soundcraft Signature 22 that I had beforehand, right? I don't have the same amount of options as I do as when I have this PreSonus mixer, right? Because then I can do all of the different DAW mode and stuff, and I can send all the different channels out and in with the mixer because the DAW works with the mixer. They're made by the same company, right? I believe Pro Tools works really well in my experience with Focusrite interfaces. They have the Scarlett Solo, the Scarlett 2i2, and they have a couple Thunderbolt interfaces that work really well, the 16-channel versions or the 16 input versions. Focusrite gear goes really well with Pro Tools and Avid software. And then again, we have the Audio Box USB, also made by PreSonus. So when I started, it was a bundle that I got from PreSonus that came with a version of Studio One back in the day, and it came with the Audio Box USB because it interfaced very well with their software. So when you're choosing your audio interface, something to consider is maybe the DAW you're using, right? Sometimes the people who make your DAW will also make audio interfaces that go very well with the DAW that you're using. Step number 3 to consider when you're buying an audio interface or when you're choosing an audio interface is flexibility, okay? This is where the Scarlett Solo kind of falls short for me, right? It's got one knob here for monitoring, and on the back, which always kind of made things difficult. Oh, they changed it. It used to be RCA outs on the back, but it is a little bit of a weird USB out here, which makes it a little bit less flexible. But these used to be RCA outs on the back. Oh, and it made it so difficult to kind of work with your monitors. But jumping back here to the front, it has one monitor knob, whereas if we look at the PreSonus audio box here, it's got a mixer knob as well as a headphone control and a main control. So it lets you choose, it gives you a little bit more flexibility when choosing between the volume of your inputs, right? You can set your input volume the same way you can on your Scarlett Solo here, right? You have an input gain for each input. But then here, you can set your headphone volume, you can set your main volume, and you can choose the volume between, the playback coming from your DAW or your computer and your inputs. It gives you a little bit more flexibility with this 2-input design than the Scarlett Solo does. So if you need that extra flexibility, if you don't want to kind of have to be, pulling knobs down in your DAW and then pulling your monitor up because you want to hear a little bit more yourself rather than your DAW, if you don't want to play that game of jumping back and forth between the faders in your DAW and the knob here on your interface, then you probably want to reach for something a little bit similar to the Audio Box USB here, where you have the extra monitor knobs to control your monitoring system. Now, if you need even more flexibility, I would definitely reach for something like the Soundcraft Signature here or the PreSonus, the Studio Live series here. What this gives you control is you have completely separate control over your monitor volume for all your channels as well as your input. So you can set your input gain up here on your input section. We have our little gain section here. And then you can set your fader level for your headphones. So any kind of monitoring situation you have, you will run right off. You can run it right off of the mixer, and that's not going to affect your gain level going into your DAW. So you can set your gain level for your DAW, get that set, make sure you're not clipping, make sure you have plenty of headroom, and then you don't have to touch that when you start messing with your monitoring level. You can set that completely separately from your input gain, which is a big time saver. You don't have to jump back and forth. And okay, I got my input gain set. Now I have to, move my monitor knob up. Oh, but I can't hear enough of this. So let me, jump the mixer knob here. So like on your audio box, right, you have your mixer knob. So I want to hear more of the input rather than the playback. But then you turn your input up because you want to hear more of your mic coming in, and then your playback's not loud enough. So then you're jumping into your DAW to try and turn your playback up, or putting a limiter on to try and get a little bit more gain out of your DAW. That's a tough game to play, and it takes a lot of time, a big time saver, a lot of flexibility with Studio Live, a 32-channel mixer like this, or a 22-channel mixer. Any kind of the mixers, even if you don't need this many inputs, right? Soundcraft makes a 16 and a 12-channel version of this, I believe. And then the Studio Live comes in a 16 and a 24-channel, right? So if you don't need 32 channels, but you still want the flexibility of being able to have a mixer, being able to have the faders in front of you, right? Move the faders separately from your input gain. You can still get something like that by reaching for, the 16-channel or the 12-channel Soundcraft Signature is what I believe their lowest is. Also, with the flexibility of a mixer, you have your EQ, and then on the Studio Lives like this, you actually have compression and reverb and gates and limiters built into each channel, as well as on the main mix. And you have, on this one, you have, 16 separate mixes that you can run out of the back of the mixer if you need to run to a headphone amp, or if you need to send people different mixes. If you were using it in a live scenario, right, you can send out 16 different in-ear mixes if you needed to, or you can use them as groups to run your drums, your vocals, your guitars, that type of thing as well. So it gives you a little bit more flexibility than with your Soundcraft here, as you only have 2 groups and you have a couple of your auxes. So technically you have, 5 different aux outputs, and then you have your group outputs if you want to send those out separately as well, or just send them to your mains. So 3 steps we're going over here to choose the best audio interface for your home studio situation. Step number 1 is you want to think about how many inputs you actually need on your audio interface. Is it just 2? Is it just you in your home studio? Are you just, using drum plugins so you don't need to track live drums? You just need a vocal and a guitar or stereo keys? Or are you tracking a live band and you need that extra 16 or 24 or 32 inputs on your mixer? That's something you want to consider first before moving on. Step 2 is you want to take into account what DAW you're using, right? If you're using, PreSonus Studio One, maybe you want to reach for a PreSonus interface, like the AudioBox USB. They have the AudioBox Go now. They have the Revelator, and then they have their Studio Live series if you want that extra inputs of the mixer, that extra flexibility of the mixer. And then if you're using Pro Tools, maybe you want to reach for something in the Focusrite area, the Scarlett Soul, or you can always go down the Behringer route. Or these AudioBox and the Studio Lives will work as well with your Pro Tools rig. And step number 3 is you want to think about how much flexibility you're going to need, or how much flexibility you want in your studio situation. Do you want a nice big rack mount or rack mixer? Or do you want a nice big full mixer like this where you can move the different flying faders and EQ and compress and add effects right on the channel like that? Or do you need something smaller? You don't want that kind of flexibility. You just want a nice 2 or even 1 channel interface that you can just, set right next to your computer and just set your gain and be fine with it. And you don't want to mess with the monitoring and all that. If that's what you want, go that route, right? Obviously, those types of things are going to be cheaper as well than your giant rack mount mixers, right? $5,000 is a big investment to make if you're just getting started. So there are smaller options for mixers if you want to go that route. So you want to consider all three. You want to consider your number of inputs, the DAW you're using, and the amount of flexibility. If you need more inputs but you want that flexibility, there are smaller mixers. Like I said, even 8-channel mixers will give you that flexibility that you need without having to sacrifice your budget. I hope that was helpful for you all. I hope that gave you a little bit of insight to consider when you're choosing your audio interface. If you want to go a little bit deeper into the mixing process, like I said, click the link in the description. You can download my 7-step mixing checklist. It is completely free, and it will take you through the entire mixing process from start to a finished mix. It will get rid of all the hassle and all the guesswork that goes into mixing and help you hone your workflow. Thank you so much for watching today, and I will see you in the next video.